Hello, and welcome to the Spoonie Authors Podcast, a podcast where we explore a different disabled author's stories each week. I'm your host, Diana Gunn, and joining us today is Austin Case. Austin Case received a master's degree from the University of Amsterdam in Western Esotericism and Mysticism. His academic knowledge of the occult and other peripheral phenomena has given him a unique take on fantasy and speculative fiction. His book, Wild Dark Times, came out in 2019. Hello, Austin.
Hi, Diana.
It is great to be chatting with you. I am super excited. I'm also very obsessed with the occult, although not quite to the point of getting a master's degree yet. Maybe we'll revisit that later. Uh, so let's start with your book, Wild Dark Times. What is it all about?
Sure. Yeah. So it's an urban fantasy with psychedelic and lots of occult elements and horror. Basically, it takes place during the summer 2012, and it focuses around the whole Mayan Apocalypse thing, which we all know is pretty silly, and I address that a bit in the books, but. In a nutshell, it focuses on Elizabeth, who is a bank teller who went to school studying art, but is kind of burnt out on that. And she's attacked by a coworker who's possessed by a supernatural creature, and then she's saved by this mysterious sorcerer Eddie, who drags her and a skeptical scholar of the occult along to the Europe, where he introduces them both to some of his fellow magician friends who are celebrities in their own rights, members of a band, and also a creator of. I always want to say comic books, but I know Albert would be pissed because he makes graphic novels. The character, but anyway, so they all kind of drag them along for this and figure out the best ways to figure out why the impending apocalypse is coming because of this creature out of Gnostic Christian mythology, a Demiurge, and they all have their own sort of magical abilities, except for uh, Elizabeth, and she's trying to figure out why she's involved with this, even though there's all these other specialists and magicians. So that's kind of the thrust of the narrative.
So, can you tell the audience what a demiurge is?
Sure. So basically, what a demiurge is in Gnostic Christianity is this creature that claims that it's God. So there's a lot of different texts. A lot of them were found. One was called the Nag Hammadi corpus in a region in Egypt back in I think in the 50s or 60s. But anyway, it was a form of Christianity developed in the early 2nd century, roughly, and so a demiurge is basically based on this really the angry idea of what God is. A lot of times, like there's really a lot of fucked up ideas of what God is throughout the whole Bible, and the Gnostics were interesting because they kind of address that in their own sort of ways, and they think that there's this actual God that exists beyond these different entities, like these other archons and demiurges, but it's this abstract being of light and love, as opposed to this angry, judgmental thing. And so that's kind of what I base this creature on. It's a being that thinks it's God. It's kind of built itself off the Book of Revelation, the last book in the New Testament, and it's using all this hatred from fundamentalist Christianity and all these other sort of traditions of imperialism to sort of gain power and control. And I kind of touch upon, God is this much more abstract kind of concept that's only kind of hinted at in it, but this thing that this really powerful, hateful entity that's basically God-like with its powers is more of a demon than a god per se.
Interesting. And what specifically drew you to this particular creature?
Well, I guess it's part of sort of what you would call esoterica, the Western esoteric tradition. I studied a decent amount about Gnosticism before and after grad school, and just the story of that was always so interesting to me because I always, I studied religion academically, and with a focus, like I said, in esotericism. But like, I always was interested in religion, but I just was always rubbed the wrong way so much by a lot of interpretations of what God was. He's like always comes off as a dick, and it's because of that, like, right, like he's kind of that way. But when I read this the stories and these myths, I'm kind of like, well, no, that's just this thing, like sort of people's projections and their own sort of hatred's kind of born out of this. But what's actually divine is something more nuanced and pure and not necessarily based on these prejudices. And I think I'm like, well, that's interesting. And like, what if I use that as a sort of a villain idea that I could draw off? And that's ultimately what I did with the Demiurge and the person he basically possesses, this William Donaldson. But there's a lot more to him too. I don't want to give too many spoilers away, but
Sounds fascinating. Um, I could honestly discuss this all day. It sounds like a great book, but you also had a short story called Dirks Summit, published in Shout, an anthology of resistance poetry and short fiction. So first up, can you tell us a little bit about this anthology? Because it sounds great.
yeah, absolutely. So I stumbled across this not long ago. They actually put this all together really quickly. The Shadow Anthology through Not a Pipe publications, and they I was trying to find a place to sell a Dark Summit, which is basically a short story that it looks at different sort of like monsters and creatures out of European folklore. Like there's Dracula and Medusa, and the Krampus, and like I don't give them their names. Like there's just little, it's I kind of talk around the fact that that's what they are, and they're all having this sort of meeting about, you know. And when I wrote this was actually in 2015, so this is before everything happened with Trump immediately. But there was already this sort of rising fascist trend all around everywhere, especially here in the States. But so I thought, like, well, what if they were all kind of just talking and be like, well, what's a way to bring things back? You know, things in Europe have been, you know, relatively speaking, okay. But like, how do we bring that back? So they're like, well, we should emulate America. You know, they have this intense sense of growing nationalism and pride and xenophobia and hatred. And they all kind of like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And they can all kind of talk about the different ways they could do it in their own countries to control. But as for the publication, and I was trying to find that, I just stumbled across this, and I saw that they were planning on giving parts of the royalties to different groups. So it was the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, Black Lives Matter, and I think Racist Texas were all ones. And I'm like, these are all great organizations that are really helpful, and I think that's a really great idea. So I sent them a letter, a query letter with the description of my story, and they're like, yeah, that's great. And they published it, and they wanted to make sure they got it out pretty quickly. It just came out, I think February 2nd, so it was right before the Iowa caucus, because they wanted to get on the ball on that, even though that was kind of a whole other clusterfuck in its own way. But they wanted to make sure that it was published. Yeah. You know, right on the heels of everything coming up this election cycle. But no, it's a really great anthology. If anyone's interested, I highly suggest they look into it and purchase a copy.
Wow, that sounds great. I think that's really important work being done.
Thank you.
And yeah, things are kind of messy stateside. I'm Canadian, so I'm just sort of, watching over here with horror, smoking
Watching
my
from
legal
afar.
weed.
Oh yeah, no, that helps. Yeah,
it does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the power of fiction is really understated. I think that we, through telling these stories, have the ability to change a lot more than people give us credit for.
I think so too. In my heart of hearts, I 100% agree. It's so hard, especially since I'm someone who has anxiety, generalized anxiety. It's so hard. Like every fucking thing that's going on is just a constant trigger all the time, and it's just like, oh my god, it's the end of the world. Oh my god, it's the end of the world. But okay, what can I do specifically? But I think that you're really right about that. That sometimes any creative act of art, I think it's undersold. I think for its value to inspire and help people going, because I think that, at least in cases for people, a lot of people who feel hopeless, it's just like, well, why fight? And I think seeing something like that kind of touches a part of you to be like, oh, okay, because there's this art, we remember this part of ourselves, our collective humanity, and our collective drive to do better and to help people. And it definitely sometimes gets pushed to the margins as an important form of protest.
Absolutely. So you write mostly dark fantasy. What is it that draws you to writing dark stories?
Yeah. Well, for one, a lot of what I was just talking about, I think the a lot of what's horrible going in the world, I think writing horror and dark fantasy is cathartic in a lot of ways. It's a way to address real, problems that exist in reality in a way that involves things that are impossible, so you can kind of look at it in a different light. For one. But also, the fact that I study esotericism, mysticism, and in grad school, I think gives me a lot of raw fodder to kind of work with for ideas. Studying like secret societies or summoning demons is a lot of good groundwork to sort of draw off of for these different topics. And I think that is helpful. But also, just like I think being an academic studying it really. Growing up in like high school and college, like I studied it, and I was kind of a practitioner, kind of a neo-pagan type, and had really, I guess you could say, strong beliefs in it in a sort of way. And studying academically has made me more skeptical. Like I still have my own unique beliefs about it, I guess, but like it's sort of like the magic has lost its magic in a way since it's like when you see how the sausage is made. I think it's kind of the same thing when you study something from that scholarly perspective. You're like, well, maybe this is not as necessarily true as you thought. But I think that there's a core that's valuable. Like what I was talking about with Gnosticism before, the ideas about that, the God beyond the preconceptions. I think that's a lovely idea that I think that you can find or different things like that in different traditions and in different ideas in the esoteric canon.
Absolutely. There is actually an Egyptian theory that I really love, that all of the gods are actually just different interpretations of one divine energy. That we have these different
Mm.
names and interpretations as tools because our puny human minds cannot actually comprehend what is divine. And honestly,
Wow.
that's the only thing I can really hold to at this point. In all of my research, I have definitely also become a lot more skeptical of a lot of things. But I definitely do still believe that there's some higher power of some kind.
Absolutely. No, I have a very similar approach. It's sort of like you said, where our capacity to understand the divine is so limited that we each have our own biases that different religions, have their own sort of predilections and tendencies that get warped. But like if there is anything actually valuable out there, it's beyond what we can know. And that's interesting. A lot of different esoteric traditions talk about that. Like the book of the Corpus Hermeticum is one that kind of talks about that, and some secret societies, even though they dress it up in a lot of other fancy ideas and different kind of frou-frou rituals and stuff. They, I think, at the core of it, get to the point of them being based around an underlying truth that we all are kind of limited in understanding.
Yeah,
And I talk a little bit about that in the book too.
awesome. So I'm going to reel things in a little bit here, because I could absolutely talk mythology with you all day. It's one of my pet obsessions.
It's wonderful. I love it.
But this is the Spoonie Authors Podcast. So I wanted to talk a little bit about disability representation in media. First of all, what you have seen out there, what you do see in the media right now, but also how would you like to see disability representation change and grow in the coming years?
Sure. So I guess first and foremost, I think just the best thing is just own voices. If you can get more own voices, I think that what we've seen, not obviously relating to disability, but with issues of race, the whole American Dirt thing is just such a fucking nightmare. Like it's such a good example of specifically how the publishing industry is fucked over and designed to make money and not really listen to underrepresented voices from whatever area.
Can
And
I get you
I
to
think that
backtrack for a moment and explain for listeners
oh
who might
yes.
not know, first of all, the term own voices, and second of all, just a quick overview of the American Dirt fiasco for people who are, less involved in publishing.
Absolutely, yeah. Sorry, I'll clarify. So for own voices is literally just writing written from people from whatever perspective that is. So individuals who have disabilities, for the specifically people who are Black or people of color, writing from that LGBTQ community, who are actually just part of that, who are actually writing about their own lived experiences, rather than a white cis whatever person writing necessarily. And when it comes to the American Dirt thing, that's an example of that was not what happened. So the American Dirt was written. I can't remember her name. There was an author who's just a white American author who wrote about the narrative going on within Mexico of the different immigrants trying to get into America, but also a lot of different problems are going on, that she just had all these really bad biases, and the way that the publication celebrated it was really awful. Like, I remember there was I think like a party, or like a gala or something, where they had like barbed wire decoration on the tables, which is just
Oh,
really horrible. Like, just ghoulish representation of the suffering of these real people who are, trying to understand it. And the way that she misrepresents them is just for this market of publishing. And I think that's a big problem. This is a particularly clear example of that. How when a lot of the times these voices aren't properly represented, or at the very least not even properly researched enough, that these horrible things spiral out, and different biases and sometimes stereotypes get represented in the literature like that, and they further perpetuate these ideas.
yeah, it's a very clear-cut case of appropriation and the dangers of non-own voices writing. It's
Mhm.
also just honestly a really clear example of how racists double down and try to make themselves seem like, no, I'm not a racist, I'm just a nice white lady. Um,
Yeah.
and she actually, not only were there barbed wire centerpieces, she she got her nails done with a custom barbed wire print, and
Right.
it was really classy. Oh, and once she started receiving
Yeah.
backlash, she also decided to point out the fact that her grandmother was Puerto Rican. Um, I'm not
Right. I
sure if
forgot
she
to
was
mention
trying to
that. Yeah.
say
That
that her
whole.
grandmother was an immigrant, in which case that's really unfortunate because, Puerto Rico is part of America. Um,
Yeah.
or if she was
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
say she has Latina background. I'm not sure which she was going for, but either way, it came out really bad, and it really
It's
illustrated how
Yeah, well,
awful
it's
this kind
either
of thing
way.
can
Yeah, how
be.
tone deaf. Yeah, just even coming from that. Just even if hypothetically she was just trying to have this perspective of being Latina, it's like, well, okay, yeah, your grandmother was maybe Latina, but you never lived the experience of that. Like, you're very clearly living a white person's reality. As who you are. So it's just, yeah, it's a big mess.
Yeah. And I do believe that there is some room for people to write about identities not their own, but it has to be done with a lot more respect than that. And most of the time, we should be giving the people with the marginalized identities room to speak first.
Yes, and I think, yeah, I also agree that it's possible for people outside of a marginalized group to write, but like you said, it's important to do the research, and that's the value of beta readers, of sensitivity readers. You can actually listen to them and be like, if you're coming from that, you're almost definitely going to have some sort of biases, because that's just part of how privilege works. So you need to have an outside voice check you on that and see, like, oh, this is where this is wrong. You need to edit this, change this, and maybe you could actually tell a legitimate story, as long as you don't necessarily focus around you or your sort of misconceptions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can absolutely include those characters in your work. You don't have to, make them main characters. Having diverse people in the
Hmm.
background is a big deal too. That if you are just a white cis person who wants to write stories, fine, write stories about other white cis people, but like just make sure that in the background somewhere you acknowledge that other types of people exist.
Exactly, yeah, and don't make them caricatures.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any stories that you have encountered that are doing disability representation well?
Uh, I think that one that seemed to deal with it a little bit was, I can't remember it. It was, I'm trying to remember the name of the series. It was the children. Oh gosh, it was kind of the fantasy fiction one where they were made fairly recently, and they all kind of different come from their own different fantasy realities. Every Heart a Doorway. That was the first book in the series.
Oh, that
And
series.
it's Yeah, and I feel like they did okay. Maybe less with disability representation. I think that they address different attributes of mental illness. Some they also address uh, trans characters. I think no, they do address aspects of mental, even though it's not necessarily on the nose. I think they talk about how some of the characters, I think the protagonist had signs of depression, and she was kind of having issues with her parents. Like, why aren't you that sort of happy girl I know anymore? And I think they did okay. That it wasn't a perfect representation, I think, because it had a few holes here and there. But sadly, that's kind of the best we can get as of late a lot of times. But I think that they did fairly well with different kinds of representation with disability, as well as representing trans folk, I think.
Interesting. I've heard a lot of really mixed things about Every Heart a Doorway personally,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't
Yeah,
actually
what
read
would
it,
you
so I
hear? I'm
can't.
curious.
I heard
Okay.
that I can't really comment. Honestly,
Uh-huh.
it feels like it was a century ago. It was like a year and a half ago, but with everything that's happened in the
I know,
last 2
right?
years,
Yeah.
it feels like a century ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was one of the queer characters. It was something about queer representation that was sort of a mixed
Mm.
reaction,
A mixed
if I
bag.
recall correctly, but I might just be talking out of my ass. I'm genuinely not sure at this point, and I haven't read
It
it.
it it could have been. And I know that it's one of those things that, like, and I might have also just on my own side probably missed things, just because I am a straight cis guy, so maybe something that I thought was good, I could have been wrong. I could have just missed the mark on some of it.
Yeah, and that is always a danger. And I think that is
Mhm.
why it's so important to listen to the actual marginalized people when it comes to books like this. I think it's honestly
Mhm.
the best thing that we can do as readers is to actually research what marginalized people are saying about a book that is about marginalized people before we start reading it. Because
Yeah, in
as
that case,
white people, we're not going to know. We're not going to know until it's pointed out to us
yeah.
a lot of the time, unfortunately. That's the way that racism is designed to work, right? It's designed to be in the background, something that's unseen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just since we're on that about representation, I know Charlie Jane Andrews. She's a good example of a known voices trans writer who has written a good All the Birds in the Sky is a good one. Specifically, not dealing with disability so much, but I know that's a good one you can look into.
It's a great title, too.
Right? Yeah.
All right, so that brings us to almost the end of our interview. For my final question, what is next? What are you working on, and where can readers keep track of it? Find out what's happening.
Sure. So the book I'm writing right now, it's an adaptation of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is just like so much fucking hubris that I'm trying to do like the oldest narrative as a modern adaptation. But basically, like, as part of my undergraduate, I studied Akkadian, which is the language that a lot of the text for Gilgamesh was written on. And if anyone doesn't know it, it's kind of the oldest written narrative we have, like the oldest epic story. And it's interesting because it deals pretty extensively with a lot of ideas that we would kind of consider, I guess, existential now, like understanding one person's value and existence. What makes life meaningful. And the way I'm kind of taking it is just kind of portraying the way celebrities and politics are all kind of mingled together in our culture is sort of the way that deities and rulership are kind of like that. So because we in a lot of ways we do sort of deify celebrities as well as just different sort of figures like that. And I kind of wanted to touch upon that, I think, when I was looking into it. So this, yeah, looking at this sort of, even though it's sort of a fantastical mythological concept, I'm trying to write in a sort of realistic way, because I think that it could be come across and just sort of critiquing the way how corrupt our political institution in our country is. And I don't know, it's a hard one to write. It's this one's a lot tougher to get out than Wild Dark Times was, but I think it's gonna be better once I get it done. But as far as following me, you can follow me on Twitter at esoteric ESOTERIC underscore Austin AUSTIN. And you can also check out my website. It's Austin Esoteric, like that dot wix site WIXSITE.com/website. And I'll keep posting on that. And if I have any other ideas as I'm kind of go along, every once in a while I'll write more poetry or short stories.
Awesome. And good luck with your reinterpretation of Gilgamesh. I'm only kind of familiar with that one, and I understand it's huge. There's a lot of material to work with.
Yeah,
Sounds
it's
kind of
it's a dense one
overwhelming
to
to me.
unpack.
Sounds
It
kind of
is. It's
overwhelming.
yeah.
So good luck with that challenge, and thank you for joining us. It has been a lovely chat.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Spoonie Authors Podcast. The Spoonie Authors Podcast is part of the Spoonie Authors Network, a community initiative devoted to sharing the stories of disabled authors and educating abled people about what life is like for disabled creatives. Transcripts of this podcast are also available on the Spoonie Authors Network. To learn more or become a contributor, visit spoonieauthorsnetwork.blog. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to leave a 5-star review on your favorite podcast streaming